Nevermind was a smash commercial success, and if Nirvana were to try to replicate that success with a follow-up album that had a similar sound, it would certainly be understandable. But the band chose to do something different. As opposed to creating Nevermind Part 2, so to speak, they went in the opposite direction. For a grunge record, Nevermind had a very sleek production quality to it. With the band's follow-up record, In Utero, they chose to go in a more stripped-down direction, with producer Steve Albini. Famously, because of Nirvana's decision to pursue a more stripped-down production on In Utero, there ended up being a significant amount of tension at one point between the band, the label, and In Utero's producer, Steve Albini. If you'd like to see my In Utero interview with Steve Albini, during which he talks about the fallout between himself and Nirvana's label and how severely it impacted his life, the link is available in the description box below. For this video, I'm going to read to you a quote from Kurt where he talks about how Steve Albini recorded In Utero. This quote is from July of 1993. Quote, "We got the sound that we wanted. Exactly the same sound that I have been carrying in my head since the beginning of this band. I always wanted to record a record which has a very personal ambiance to it. A record that sounds as though you were standing next to a band in a room, where you're hearing all the reflections off the walls. That's exactly how it transferred onto tape. The reason for that is that we use a lot of microphones. The theory that I came across one night when I was thinking about how to get a band across on record was I realized microphones are directional, and they only pick up the surface of whatever the microphone's pointed at and within a radius of a few inches. I thought if you pointed 3 or 4 microphones at the snare drum, you'd be able to get the real sound of the snare drum. It sounds ridiculous to 99% of producers because that's not the way they've been taught. It's not the standard way. But I've always liked to experiment, so I thought I would like to do something like that. Ever since we started recording, I've suggested it to producers and they weren't willing to do it. They just said it isn't the way to record. But listening to Surfer Rosa and Pod, the Pixies and Breeders album Steve Albini produced, I sensed that was what Steve was doing, though I didn't know. I'd never read any interview where he explained his recording process, but I just felt he might be doing it. And I'd heard he was very much into experimenting, so I thought if he didn't do it this way, then he might be willing to try it. But it turned out that's exactly what his trick is. We used maybe 30 microphones taped to the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all over the place. That's exactly how it was recorded. I had 5 or 6 microphones in front of my amplifier. A few up close, a few a couple of feet away, and that's how we recorded, that's how the vocals were recorded, with 5 microphones. I did vocals and guitar separately. We used a ridiculous number of microphones. They play a big part in his theory of recording. He uses a lot of old German microphones from the 1930s and other brand I can't name, but very specific ones. I never wanted to become this much of a tech head, because I always figured if you just played passionately, it would come out that way, but it's not like that. It's a very strict and meticulous job, something I've had a hard time with ever since I started recording. It's mathematics, and I've always been terrible at math. It's a very long, tedious process which just goes on for hours and days and days. Mind-boggling. It's like trying to cram for an exam the night before. It's definitely not as easy as a lot of people think. Put up a few microphones and play. That's not it. I did all the vocal tracks in about 6 hours for the whole record. Kept knocking them off one after the other. It just happened to be a good day. Sometimes my voice will go out within a couple of hours. Sometimes my voice will go out within a couple of hours. That happened a lot on the Nevermind sessions." End quote. Now, as mentioned off the top, there was controversy in terms of the production of the record. When both the band and Nirvana's label heard the finished product, they both felt the mix wasn't where it should be, which resulted in REM producer Scott Litt being hired to touch things up. One of the things that were touched up were Kurt's vocals. The following is another quote from Kurt from July of '93 where he touches on this. Quote, "We decided to take a chance on remixing 2 of our songs to make sure the vocals would be loud enough. Heart-Shaped Box and Scentless Apprentice. The rest of them we thought we'd take the chance of improving them during the mastering. Mastering is an amazing thing. You can really change a lot of things. You can take the vocals completely out or turn them up 4 or 5 decibels. That took care of it. We'd realized the bass wasn't audible enough and the vocals were too quiet and that's about it. But that's all we changed and now we're 100% satisfied. I wouldn't change anything now. Though there was that initial 3 weeks when it's true that we didn't know what we were going to do. For about 3 weeks, we were baffled. We didn't know what was wrong. So I wasn't looking forward to hearing it when usually I'll listen to what we've just recorded a lot to scrutinize it. I just could not put my finger on it at all. I couldn't tell what was wrong. Then, after about 3 weeks, we all realized the vocals weren't loud enough. We just hadn't spent enough time on the mixes. End quote. In terms of Kurt's vocals, as mentioned in one of Kurt's quotes, he recorded his vocals for In Utero all in about 6 hours for the whole record. During my In Utero interview with Steve Albini, he touched upon how Kurt recorded all the vocals one after another and some of the interesting aspects about how Kurt recorded his vocals. If you'd like to see the full interview with Steve Albini, the link is available below. Here's the clip of him discussing Kurt's vocals.
One of the distinctive elements of In Utero, in my opinion, is the raspiness of Kurt's voice. He screams on all the records, but I really find with Bleach and In Utero in particular, he's really letting loose. With a song like Tourette's, he's basically just screaming the whole time. Did he ever blow out his voice when he was recording that record?
I don't recall anything specific, although he basically sang the whole album in one go, and I think he paced it so that the less demanding songs would be early in the session, and then the harsher songs would be at the end. And then I do recall him coming in the next day and revisiting a couple of those songs, either redoing parts or whole chunks of songs.
The first song you guys did was Serve the Servants. Did you get any of the arrangements for the music before you started recording, or was everything just you get there and for the first time you're hearing these songs?
They had sent me Rio demo, which was a demo tape that they had made in Rio de Janeiro that had most of the songs from the session and a few loose jams. The arrangements were all pretty worked out, and Kurt had ideas about, for each song, he had little extra bits that he wanted to do, either a second guitar or a contrasting part he wanted to add that wasn't necessarily structural, but there would be like, okay, well, we get to this bit, it's going to be a second guitar that's going to take over or going to join. And there wasn't not a lot of it was extemporaneous. Almost all of it was, in one way or another, was worked out. Kurt had a notebook that had his lyrics and his song ideas in it. In that notebook, he also had articulated specific things about the guitar sound, like he wanted to swap amplifiers for certain songs. He used a Randall amplifier for some of it. He used, the bulk of it was this broken Fender quad reverb that he really liked. Serve the Servant specifically, I know that he used this broken quad reverb, and it was missing 3 of the 4 power tubes. So the output of the amplifier was, in technical terms, it was asymmetrical, meaning that there would be distortion on one half of the waveform and not on the other half. And that would be, an unusual thing, but it had a very harsh, distorted sound, but Kurt was actually quite fond of that harshness. And so that was a big part of that record, was him choosing a very specific voicing for each guitar.
Is there anything in particular about these sessions that stick out to you?
There are a couple of very specific things about Kurt's approach that were unique at the time and remain unique. He essentially sang the entire album in one sitting.
Really?
I think he came back the next day and did a few of the songs that, he may have redone a song or did a few of the songs that he didn't get to the first day. But essentially, we started the vocal tracking, and then we just pressed on that whole day, and he sang the whole album. That by itself is pretty unusual. His approach to singing was that while he was singing, he always wanted to be playing an instrument of some kind. In the beginning, he had this percussion instrument called a rain stick that he was toying with while he was doing the vocals. Mm-hmm. And it made this, brutal rattling sound that was picking up in the vocal microphones. And then when he heard the first playback, he was like, hey, can you get rid of that rain stick? And I was like, yeah, sorry, that's built in, So he ended up re-singing that song, but and then he switched to this slightly broken acoustic guitar. He had this acoustic guitar that had a cracked top and had very old, very dead strings, and he would just strum along quietly while he was preparing to sing the song. And there are a couple of songs where you can hear this acoustic guitar sort of accompanying the quiet bits of the verse. And that wasn't a separate recording of an acoustic guitar. That was just the acoustic guitar he was carrying in his lap that he was using as a sort of a rhythmic confidence item during the singing. And so that acoustic guitar was a byproduct of his method of recording the vocals. I felt like he was being very square and very open with me during the session. Like he would tell me what he liked and what he didn't like, and I believed him, and he would tell me what his aesthetic inspirations were for certain things.